everyone. Welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now. I hope you're well. I hope your reading has been taking you to places that maybe you've never been before, or been introducing you to characters that you never imagined existed. Because if there's one thing that we know, if we are avid crime fiction readers, that there's always a new story to be read. There's always a new character to be found within those pages. Well, the wonderful people at Riverrun asked me a little while back, would I like to interview an author? Well, they always put excellent people forward. But when they give you the chance to interview someone who you never even knew about, and I'm embarrassed to say so, but when you find out about their existence, it's so thrilling. I don't think I have ever had the chance to interview an author from this country. And so the Doctor is extremely excited about that, as you can imagine. But I have to say as well that the quality of the writing in this novel that we're going to talk about when we get to know the author, I highly recommend this book to you. Anyway, without further ado, I would like to welcome into the consultation D.A. Mishani, or Dro. Welcome. How are you? It's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to talk to you.
An absolute pleasure. We should also make mention as well of your translator, Jessica Cohen, who, always when we consider work in translation, the fact that conduit, the translator, allows us to hear you, allows us to hear your way of expressing yourself on the page. And so thank you, Jessica. If you get a chance to watch this, we're very, very grateful. So I wonder if you do me the honours, Dro, and hold up the original book, the book that our translation,
Here it is.
Here it is.
It's called Emuna in Hebrew.
Emuna. And does Emuna mean conviction?
Not exactly. Emuna means, more literally, it means faith. And also, like in English, it's a female name. And it's a name that has a role in the novel. But when we thought about the translation and the name that it should be given in English, we felt that conviction, with its double meaning,
Yes.
or layered meaning, is more accurate.
It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for that explanation and that insight into why we have what we have. And just to show the people who are watching, there we go. There's the copy. Do get yourself one, seriously. There was another thing, though, that interested me about the original copy of the contrast. On the original text, we see a woman holding a baby. And yet in the translation version that we have, I have the silhouette of a man in what looks to be maybe a hotel room or a room, maybe a room in, well, it looks like a room in London, really, in an inner city, or perhaps Paris. I'm not sure. Could you tell us a little bit about the choice in the original? I can understand why we have that image. Why did you choose the image for the original?
Yeah, so in both cases, it was really editorial decisions. And in fact, it was a choice. It's a very interesting choice between two stories, because in fact, the novel has two stories and two investigations going on. In one of them, there's a baby and a mother-baby relationship. And in the other is a story of a man, a tourist. Maybe we'll go into that later. And the story of the man is, I would, more of a typical detective fiction story. And the story of the mother and the child, for me, it is also a detective fiction story, but it has more of drama elements in it. And I think that when doing the Israeli cover, the editor, because in the Israeli book market, crime fiction is less popular than it is in the
Mhm.
UK.
Okay.
I think they wanted to emphasize this, dramatic aspect of the novel, this aspect of the relationship between parents and children. And although, in River Run, they wanted to go full on with the crime fiction cover, and I like both.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. It's so interesting to know how a readership responds, what is expected, and also how the national psyche, if you will, how it responds to that concept of crime fiction or not, and its popularity or not. So yeah, I really appreciate this. Thank you. Um, your main protagonist, Inspector Avram, how did he come into being for you? Because this is his fourth novel, your fourth novel.
Yeah,
But if we can
yeah.
go back to the beginning, because you know this guy now, you've been working with him for a while. But how did he first appear to you, and what convinced you for him to be put onto the page?
So it's a very long story, but I'll try to
Okay,
condense it. So he
yeah,
was born almost 11 years ago. My first novel and the first installment in the series, The Missing File, was published in Hebrew in 2011. And in fact, it was after a few years that I was really deep into crime fiction in many ways. I was working as an editor for a publishing house in Israel. I was doing mainly Israeli fiction, not crime fiction at all.
okay,
But I also had my own small little series of classics of crime fiction in translation, where I did translations of Dashiell Hammett
mhm,
and of Henning Mankell, and also of contemporary writers that I like very much, like Belinda Bauer and others. And and I was also doing a PhD at the time. I was writing about the history of detective fiction and giving several courses about the history of crime writing and detectives in Tel Aviv University. And at one point, I found myself sitting in my study thinking, I like these detectives so much. And, I study them and I translate them and I edit novels. But in fact, what I really want is to have them walking here around in the streets where I was born, speaking Hebrew,
yes,
investigating
yes,
my friends,
mhm,
my family, the mysteries that I know
mhm,
from around here.
yeah,
And this is when I, put everything aside, quit my work in the publishing house, quit the PhD project even, and started The Missing File. And when I started the novel, what was clear to me for several reasons is that Avram is going to start at the bottom in a way. That Avram in The Missing File, he's a middle, like even low ranked police officer,
okay,
not very bright. He's not the Sherlock Holmes, not the Hercule Poirot of the world, not even the Adam Dalgleish. He's really a mediocre police
mhm,
officer. And what I wanted, I had this vision of writing the whole series and of him getting slowly better, and becoming, like a better detective as
mhm,
he grows in a way. Another thing that was clear to me from the beginning about him, that he's not going to be this very vain, know-it-all detective. That he's going to be very doubtful. That he will sometimes be wrong. that he will, not in every novel, he will find the solution.
Mm.
Um, and this is in a way the grain for the missing file and how I started my relationship with Avi 11 years ago. Now, like as you said, the relationship is much more complicated, and we have a love-hate relationship
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
where, and for, where he runs away from me, I chase him. Sometimes I put him aside and he's angry for me putting him
Yeah,
aside.
yeah.
um, yeah, so this is how it all began.
And as a professional,
Mhm.
has he obliged you, and has he developed his skills as a police officer, as a detective? Have you been pleased with the progress he's made in that respect?
Yeah, he has. And I think that, this novel, Conviction, is a very important step for him and
Mm,
for me in a way, because listen, the first three novels in the series, he focuses, and I, through him as a writer, we focus on dramas or even tragedies that are
mm,
very domestic in a way.
mm,
And the stories that I tell and that he investigates are, mainly of crimes that are happening in the home between people who love each other, between family members. This was my goal in the beginning.
mm,
This novel is a bit different in the sense that Avam goes, I would say, he's investigating a wider and in a way higher investigation, in the sense that he's looking out now, out the window. He's going out the
mm,
door. He's not in just within the four walls of the home. He's trying to understand something that has to do with Israeli society, with the
yeah.
mysteries and the problems of Israeli society. um, so in a way, he's not just better, but he's also, I think, more courageous, from investigation to the next. And in this investigation, he's the bravest that I've ever seen him.
Mm. Oh, do you know, it's wonder. I love the way you talk about him. Yeah, it's as if he were a best friend of yours. That very personal, and of course, because those creations, they come from within, and they may be influenced by outside
Mhm.
aspects, but they come from within. And I am thrilled the fact that he has a greater challenge in this novel. Um, you, when we talked about the different covers, you mentioned that they work perfectly because there are two investigations in Conviction that run parallel. If we could just talk a little bit about your process before we look at those two strands. Did they appear at the same time, and you knew that this is how you would, manage the plots through to the end? Or did one appear before the other? How did they come to you?
It's a great question. Well, in fact, maybe you heard already in my previous answer, but I'm a great admirer of the genre and its history
Mm-hmm.
and the developments that it has gone through, in the last 180 years since it was invented. And so on the one hand, I like writing, classic detective fiction. So not exactly a whodunit in the golden age
Sense,
style, but
yeah.
yeah, but I love the form of a good police procedural. At the same time, I find it very hard to write the same police procedural all the time, and I feel the need to experiment in form in a way in every novel. And so, in fact, from the beginning of the series, so from my first novel, The Missing File, I always write my novels through two perspectives. One of them is always the perspective of Avram, the
Mhm.
detective, so the point of view of the investigation itself, and the other is another point of view within the story. It can be the point of view of a witness. It can be the point of view of the murderer sometimes. Here, I would say it's more complicated. It's the point of view of somebody who has to do a lot with one of the crimes. Um, and in this novel, what happened is, in fact, that the idea, or the two ideas for the two plot lines, came after I finished the last novel in the series. The last novel in the series, it's called "The Man Who Wanted to Know," and it was published a few years ago. And after I finished it, I had these two ideas for the next Avram novel. And for a while, I was hesitating between them, and I couldn't write any of them. And then another story came, and I wrote my only standalone until now, a novel that is called Three, and Avram is not in it.
Uh-huh.
And he was very angry with me for not putting
I
him
can
in
imagine.
the
Mhm.
standalone. Yes, and I wrote it, and I wrote Three. And when I came back after I finished Three, I came back to these ideas
Mhm.
that I had, earlier. Suddenly it hit me that maybe what I need now is experiment with two investigations at the same time, something that I never did, something that Avi is the nickname for Avram.
Mhm.
Avi never did. And this is the kind of formal experiment that I'm looking for in this book. And I started writing them together, and gradually I understood that they connect in so many ways, um, on a very basic way, like plot. They
Mhm.
connect in terms of plot, but they also connect, I would say, metaphorically or thematically in so many ways that, and they enriched one another. That very early, while beginning to write, I understood that, I shouldn't choose between them. I should combine them into one story, and that's what I did.
Thank you. It's fascinating to listen about how. And what struck me was the importance of maybe just leaving things alone for a while, to allow. It makes me think of cooking. Sometimes if you leave things just to marinate for a while, the
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful observation. I think that, and it changes from book to book. There are books that demand to be written immediately.
yeah, yeah,
As you have the idea, you have to write it immediately. And there are books that, they need this time of, slow cooking,
yes, yeah,
like you say.
yeah, yeah. So if we can take a look at the two strands, and without giving too much away, because we want people to enjoy delving into those two strands. Um, we have the domestic side, as you say. Um, a baby is found, and on the other side we have a stranger.
Mhm.
So first of all, let's talk about strand number one, and the newborn baby that is left outside the hospital. Um, that sense of what might be, um, a new life that might or might not survive. Why choose that character?
Mm. Um, I think, like some of my stories, it started with a news piece that I saw. I saw this, it happens quite
Mm-hmm.
often that, babies are left outside hospitals or outside, like social welfare centers. And And I read a story in the paper about a baby like that, and it immediately struck me. I mean, the questions immediately appeared. Who, who left her there, and why? And at the same, I saw the complexity, or I felt the complexity of this act, that on the one hand is an act of complete despair in a way. you know, I or we can't deal with this baby, can't raise this baby, so we just give it away.
Yeah.
And it's such a terrible thing to do for yourself, for the baby too, but for yourself. But at the same time, maybe also an act full of hope, because you're saying, okay, but maybe someone will want this baby and will give it a new life.
And it will have a
And
chance, maybe. Yeah, yeah,
exactly, and somebody will love it more than I can or we can. And immediately it also struck me that it's, again, after writing 3 novels in the series, and 4, crime or novels or thrillers, that, most of the time, how it is. We start with a body, we end with a body, and suddenly, hit me that I can write a novel that might have an optimistic ending, in the sense that, if this baby survives, finds a home,
yeah,
maybe if it finds, its real parents that will want to take her back, maybe if she finds it, like a different home, but a real loving home, that I might end a crime novel on an optimistic tone, something that I always want to do and not always can do, because of the nature of the stories that I write about.
yeah. Of what you've been dealing with. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then on the other hand, this stranger, who is supposedly a Swiss tourist, and in that sense, you then bring the outside in. If you've explained, previous writings have been very much contained within that geographical setting, but now that geographical setting is troubled a little bit by someone from outside, and there's also the going out as well, and we'll talk about that. Um, Tell us a little bit about that stranger.
So this stranger came to me, first, not out of the papers, but as a story. I think, as a writer who has the chance to be, traveling quite a lot, because, thanks to my novels and the translations of my novels, in the last decade, I spent a lot of time in hotel rooms that, change every night. And suddenly, I think in one of these very brief hotel stays, I thought about, I imagined this scene of a tourist that is coming to the hotel and then disappears, while, leaving all his stuff in the hotel. And, what is the hotel doing with it? And what can happen to this tourist? And and so this is how he came to me and stayed for a while. And when I started writing these 2 stories, I understood that if the baby is really the, like you said, the domestic, the family drama, the tourist must be the bigger national scale story. And if that's the case, so it probably has to do with the Mossad. Um, I don't know how, well your viewers know the Mossad, but, the Mossad is a very highly, it's considered to be one of the first-rate intelligence organizations in the world, and it has an amazing reputation in Israel. And it's part of the dynamic of the novel, because like I said before, that crime fiction is not very popular in Israel. It's partly because the police are not very popular in Israel and they have very low reputation. I always say in Israel that, you know, one of the problems to write, you know, a brilliant detective in a novel is that people in Israel don't believe that the police force here has brilliant detectives, although they do. They do have brilliant detectives. But you know, for Israelis, the Mossad, so the organization that deals with the threats from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, with the Iranians and with the, you know, all the threats that are coming from the outside, this is the organization with the money, with the reputation, the organization that every Israeli wants to identify with,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
organizations that and so this is immediately what came to mind. You know, I will create this drama between a police officer and somebody who might be and might be not a Mossad agent.
And in doing that, I mean, and people who read your work, of course, will know Avi.
Mhm.
But anybody coming new to your work, presumably you've created a dynamic there where there's more chance for you, the Israeli reader, to think that the stranger is the more capable, more confident, the character that you might wish to align yourself with, rather than the police officer, yeah?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but you know, if you put a police officer versus an MI6 or an MI5 agent,
Mm.
you would say in Israel, you would say, well, the police officer doesn't stand a chance. And there's also a hierarchy, not just of importance, but also of, you know, what you're allowed to know. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
police officers don't know a lot of things that Mossad agents are doing, and this is part of what Avi is trying to understand this in this novel. Can I know the truth and the whole truth? Am I allowed to know the truth, or is the truth something that only, you know, very few people in the state are allowed to know?
Mm. And that raises, a very interesting question of if, if as an officer of law and order, if I am trying to solve crimes, mysteries, if I am not permitted to know everything that is necessary, how can I be successful?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the question of the truth and the nature of the truth is something that, you know, interests me throughout all my novels. And you know, the question of the truth sometimes has this, I would say, metaphysical nature. Can we know the real truth? But what I wanted to talk about in this novel is that the nature of the truth is also has this political dimension.
Mhm.
There are people who are allowed to know the truth or are allowed to know more of the truth than others. There are people who produce the truth and people who are only
Mm.
allowed to consume it. And this is in fact what Avi is dealing with and in a way challenging in this novel.
Mm, mm. And the concept of the truth in itself, you pose as something that's difficult to grasp because what even in our ordinary lives, what we perceive as truth, it may be very different. So I like the slippery feel that there is to that, and again, just to come back to that dynamic of the domestic and the outside the domestic, and even beyond, the borders that you bring in here. I like very much those three dimensions, and that brings me to my question. That the woman, with with the baby, she
Mhm.
has a teenage daughter that's been sent to Paris, and the tourist, as we mentioned, who may be more than just a tourist, but he might be Swiss. And I was intrigued by the French speaking connection there with your work, the choices that you made. Why not elsewhere? What is that French aspect for you, or the French speaking aspect, you should say?
Yeah. Um, so it has a biographical side because I've spent a few, unfortunately not enough, but almost 2 years of my life in Paris, and I love Paris very much. But it also has, I think, the more interesting and the more important thing is the genre aspect of it. In fact, I said again in the beginning that crime fiction is not very popular in Israel, not in translation. Also, that when I grew up, there were not a lot of great detectives in translation, and I didn't know. I read Sherlock Holmes as a teenager, and I read Agatha Christie, the Marples, and the Poirots, but it was that's it. That was what we had, more or
Mhm.
less, and I rediscovered crime fiction when I went to live and study in Paris, and suddenly understood what a glorious tradition this
Mhm.
genre has. And so in a way, I rediscovered the genre through French and French crime fiction, or even English and American crime fiction, but in French translation. So like it's funny, but the first Raymond Chandler novels or Dashiell Hammett novels I read in French before I read it in English, and
Yeah.
um, and I fell in love with the glorious French tradition of crime fiction, from 19th century writers like Émile Gaboriau and of course Georges Simenon, and until contemporary writers that I like very much, like Fred Vargas.
Yeah.
And and so in a way, this book is also a bit my tribute to that. I was always wondering, how will I bring Avi to Paris? Like I said in the previous cases, he was doing very domestic cases, and those wouldn't take him to Paris. And here I found the opportunity to bring him to Paris, and in a way, even he has this meeting with a French police officer that I enjoyed writing, and so it's my little tribute to how French culture and French literature contributed to my way into detective fiction.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful story. You mentioned Georges Simenon, and in the information sent by your publisher, there contained is a quote from Le Monde, French newspaper, saying that you're writing that you are the undisputable spiritual heir to Georges Simenon. How does that make you feel? That comparison being made?
To be honest, very, very proud. Also a bit anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Unfortunately, when I hear this, when I hear this, what comes to mind is the fact that Simenon sometimes took 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month to write a novel, and he published more than 150 novels throughout his life. And it takes me 2 years, sometimes 3 years to write a novel, and I don't believe I'll reach, I don't know, 10% of what he produced. But I love Josinon. As you can see in the back, I
Mm-hmm.
have, these are pictures of adaptations, cinematic adaptations of his novels. Um, what I particularly like about Josinon is the way he created a whole new detective novel, for his time, that was really a psychological novel.
Yeah.
He was the first. We have, of course, many writers who do that now, following his footsteps, I think. But he was the first who said, writing a detective novel is also writing a good psychological novel. and writing a good realistic novel about the society that we live in. And if you read his novels, they're really, on the one hand, in-depth investigations of the human psyche and the human soul, and in-depth, I would say, maps of French and sometimes European society that he is describing. I wish I will be able to do some of that in my novels. He's certainly an inspiration, no doubt.
I think the inspiration, I think even reading you in translation, yeah, that comes across, which is beautiful. The carrying on of certain traditions, but in a different setting. Well, and a wee trip to Paris, which is which is lovely. I always like to ask authors about the finished text because, of course, the work that you put into this to make it become what we have, there's many an aspect to it. Which part of this novel makes you, makes your heart sing, gives you the most pride?
I'm so happy that you asked me that. I think you're the first who asked me that question since the book was published in Hebrew and then other languages. And I have an answer for that
Oh, good.
ready, and
Yes.
I couldn't give it to anybody
Please,
before you
please,
asked it.
please give it to us.
Okay, so chapter 15. In chapter 15, which is it's the one chapter before the last one. There's an epilogue also, but chapter 15 is the one before last, and there's a dialogue. The heart of this chapter is kind of a duel between Avram and a senior Mossad officer. I won't say too much, but a senior Mossad officer and Avi is having a kind of a very direct duel, but it's not a duel with guns. It's a duel of quotations from books. And I love this episode. This scene. I love what Avam is doing there. I enjoyed writing it immensely, and for me, it's the one of the best pages of fiction I've written so far.
It makes me so happy to think that you were able to share that. Viewers, listeners, when you get to chapter 15, remember this moment and what it meant to the author. I can tell that it meant so much to you, Dro, because you've raised your hand on the screen and it's almost as if the little hand. I don't know what button you've touched on, on the chat panel or something.
I haven't, but the Zoom is apparently very sensitive to my movements, and it
You
told me
that
you
you've
raised your hand.
and I think
See?
that is, it marked a most important point in our conversation.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly.
fabulous, fabulous. Well, I'm aware of the time, um, and so if you will allow me, I will draw our conversation to a conclusion by asking you something else that in the information that I was sent that sadly I should know more, but I don't. And it's saying that this novel, The Conviction, has been shortlisted for Israel's most prestigious literary award. So it's not crime fiction award, but literary award. And that's the Sapir Prize. Could you tell us a little bit about the prize and what that that shortlisting makes you feel about the work you've produced?
Um, so first, it will be, I think, funny for you to know that in Israel we don't have prizes for crime fiction, not even one. And Sapir Prize is the kind of Israeli Booker. This is how
Okay.
it's
Wow.
yeah. This is how
Okay.
they refer it. This is how they refer to it here. Yeah, so it's the most prestigious prize for literary novels. and Conviction was shortlisted like my previous standalone three. And I'm happy about it. First, because there are no other prizes, so at least I'm
That's right.
shortlisted for
Yeah,
this, and
yeah,
also because it's nice that my novels are being read and appreciated, not only as crime novels, but
yes, yes,
they readers can see their qualities as just as fiction, just as
yes,
literature, and can
yes.
enjoy them like that.
Yeah, yeah. I would wholeheartedly endorse that, the notion of your writing can be appreciated both within and beyond those boundaries of what we understand as crime fiction.
Thank you
That
very much.
No, thank you, thank you. And as I say, I am only sorry that we have never met before and I have never known about your work before, but better
It's
late than
never too
never.
late. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
exactly, exactly. It has been an absolute delight to spend this time together. Um,
For me
I,
too.
I feel that there's no screen between us. That it's as if we were
It's
sat.
been fascinating. Thank you very much for reading my novel so sensitively and asking these very good questions.
An honor, Dro. And I just wish you all the very best with Conviction in its translated form, in English. And I hope we get the chance to be in conversation again at another point.
Thank you. Me too.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.